The massive medical facility on Centauri Prime towered above the capital city, its crystal spires reflecting the light of three setting suns. Inside the most secure wing of the hospital, doctors from 12 different species huddled around a bed where a small figure lay motionless. The patient was Tom, the 10-year-old son of first speaker Robert, one of the most powerful diplomats in the Galactic Alliance. The boy's skin had taken on a faint bluish tinge, and small crystalline formations were visible beneath his transparent outer membrane, a sign of the devastating disease that was slowly turning his neural pathways into lifeless crystal. Dr. Blue, the lead physician of the Centauri Medical Council, raised all four of his hands in frustration. "We have tried everything in our database. The crystallization continues to spread." He turned to face first speaker Robert, who stood quietly in the corner of the room. "I'm sorry, but there is nothing more we can do." Robert's facial tentacles twitched with barely controlled emotion. "Nothing more. This is the most advanced medical facility in 50 star systems. Surely there must be something." The other alien doctors shifted uncomfortably. Dr. Green, a specialist from the Rim worlds, stepped forward. Her bioluminescent spots pulsed with sadness as she spoke. "The disease is progressing faster than we expected. At this rate," she paused, her translator struggling to find gentle words, "your son has perhaps 3 months." The news hit the room like a physical force. Robert's assistant began recording the prognosis into the official medical logs, his mechanical fingers clicking against the datavat. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet room. "What about the experimental treatments?" Robert asked, his voice rough. "The ones still in testing." Dr. Blue's skin darkened, a sign of deep regret. "We've run simulations for every known treatment in development. None of them show any promise against this particular mutation. The crystallization process is unlike anything we've seen before." As the medical team continued their discussion, a junior doctor named Mark stood quietly by the monitoring equipment. He was one of the few humans on staff, generally assigned to handle less critical cases due to humanity's relatively recent entrance into the Galactic Alliance. But something about the crystal formations tickled at his memory. "Excuse me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The universal translators picked it up anyway, broadcasting it to everyone present. "But this reminds me of something we dealt with on Earth." The room fell silent. Dr. Blue's upper eyes blinked in surprise while his lower ones narrowed in skepticism. "Earth. Your planet has only had interstellar travel for 50 years. What could you possibly have seen that would compare to this?" Mark stood his ground. "Not exactly the same, but similar. We had cases of crystalline formations in neural tissue after some early teleportation accidents. We developed a treatment using nanite technology combined with biological repair mechanisms." Several of the alien doctors made sounds of dismissal. Nanite technology was considered crude and dangerous by most advanced species, who preferred pure biological solutions. But Robert moved closer to Mark, his tentacles extended in a gesture of intense interest. "Tell me more," the first speaker commanded. "The treatment was successful in 60% of cases," Mark continued, "and that was 20 years ago. The technology has improved significantly since then." Dr. Blue's skin rippled with patterns of disbelief and concern. "First speaker, surely you aren't considering this. Human medical technology is primitive at best, dangerous at worst." Robert looked at his son's still form, watching the crystal formation slowly spreading beneath his skin. When he spoke, his voice was firm. "My son has 3 months to live with our advanced methods. If there's even a chance," he turned to Mark, "contact your people. I want to know everything about this treatment." Mark nodded and hurried from the room, already composing a message to Earth's medical authority in his mind. Behind him, he could hear the alien doctors beginning to argue, their translators struggling to keep up with their agitated speech. No one noticed, but for the first time in days, Tom's vital signs showed a tiny improvement, as if hope itself was medicine. The medical conference room aboard Centauri Prime buzzed with tension. Holographic displays showed detailed scans of Tom's neural pathways, the crystalline formations glowing an ominous blue against the black backdrop of space. Representatives from Earth's medical authority had arrived within hours of Mark's message, much to the surprise of the Alien Medical Council. Dr. Jack, the lead researcher from Earth's Neural Institute, stood before the assembled aliens. He was a tall man with gray hair and weathered hands that moved constantly as he spoke. Behind him, three-dimensional models of human design nanites rotated slowly in the air. The treatment we propose is a two-stage process, Jack explained, his voice calm despite the skeptical looks from the alien doctors. First, we introduce specially programmed nanites to stop the crystal formation. Then we use modified stem cells to repair the damaged tissue. Dr. Blue's skin rippled with patterns of concern. Nanites. In a child's brain. This is exactly the kind of reckless approach we feared from humans. His translator broadcasted his words with what sounded like a disapproving tone. First speaker Robert, who had barely slept since his son's diagnosis, leaned forward. "Tell me about the risks." Jack nodded, tapping the holographic display to show previous case studies. "I won't pretend it's without danger. The nanites must be precisely calibrated to Tom's unique biology. One mistake could accelerate the crystallization instead of stopping it." The room erupted in worried murmurs. Dr. Green's bioluminescent spots flashed rapidly. "This is madness. We cannot allow such primitive technology to be used on a diplomatic family member. The political implications alone." "Primitive," Jack interrupted, his patience finally showing cracks. "While you've been perfecting biological solutions, we've been combining technology and organic medicine in ways you've never considered. Look at these results." The hologram shifted to show before and after scans of previous patients. The alien doctors fell silent as they studied the images. Even Dr. Blue's skepticism seemed to waver. Mark, standing at the back of the room, watched the faces of his alien colleagues. He saw the moment when professional curiosity began to overcome their prejudice. These were doctors, after all. Their first duty was to heal. "How quickly can you begin?" Robert asked, his tentacles moving in patterns that indicated both hope and fear. "We've already started manufacturing the nanites," Jack replied. "But we need your medical council's approval to proceed. Without it, we can't legally." "This is absurd," Dr. Blue interrupted. "First speaker, I must formally protest. Using experimental human technology on your son could have diplomatic repercussions across the alliance, not to mention the medical risks. My son has 10 weeks left," Robert said quietly, but his voice carried throughout the room. "In 10 weeks, he will be dead. Your advanced medicines, your biological solutions, they have failed. Are your pride and prejudice worth my child's life?" The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Green's spots had dimmed to almost nothing. Dr. Blue's skin had taken on the pale color of defeat. "There is," Mark suddenly spoke up, "another consideration." All eyes turned to him. "If this works, think of how many others it could help. How many lives could be saved by combining our different approaches to medicine?" Jack nodded approvingly. "Exactly. This isn't about proving human technology superior. It's about finding new ways to heal. Together." Robert looked around the room, his gaze settling on each doctor in turn. "I am not asking as a first speaker. I am asking as a father. Please, let them try." One by one, the alien doctors began to nod. Even Dr. Blue finally raised his 4 hands in a gesture of acceptance. "We will assist in any way we can," he said. "But if anything goes wrong, then it's on my head," Jack replied firmly. "Now let's get to work. We have a boy to save." As the medical team dispersed to begin preparations, Mark caught Jack's eye. The older doctor gave him a slight nod of thanks. They both knew that this was more than just about saving one child. It was about proving that humanity's unique approach to medicine deserved its place in the galaxy. The race against time had begun. The gleaming halls of Earth's Advanced Medical Center in Geneva stood in stark contrast to the crystalline architecture of Centauri Prime. Instead of towering spires and organic curves, the human facility was all clean lines and practical efficiency. Medical drones hummed quietly through the corridors, carrying supplies and monitoring equipment. Tom lay in a specialized containment unit, his bluish skin now showing even more pronounced crystal formations. First Speaker Robert hadn't left his son's side during the entire transport from Centauri Prime. His tentacles moved restlessly, betraying his anxiety despite his diplomatic training. Dr. Ann, the facility's chief of experimental procedures, studied the real-time scans of Tom's neural pathways with intense concentration. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her eyes reflected the holographic displays floating around the containment unit. "The crystallization pattern is fascinating," she murmured, more to herself than the others present. "It's following the myelin sheaths of the neural pathways, but the progression isn't uniform." She turned to Dr. Blue, who stood uncomfortably in the human facility. "Have you ever seen anything like this alignment before?" Dr. Blue's skin shifted through various shades of uncertainty. "Never. This variant appears to be unique. That's partly why our treatments failed. We couldn't predict its behavior." Anne nodded, her fingers dancing through the holographic controls. "Watch this," she said, pulling up a comparison display. On one side was Tom's scan, on the other was a human neural pathway, affected by early teleportation accidents. "See the similarity in the crystal structure?" The alien doctors gathered closer, their various sensory organs focused on the display. Dr. Green's bioluminescent spots pulsed with surprise. "The lattice formation. It's almost identical." "Almost," Anne agreed, "but not quite. That's why we can't just use our existing treatment protocol. We need to modify it for Tom's unique biology." She turned to face Robert. "With your permission, we'd like to take a genetic sample to begin customizing the nanites." Robert's tentacles formed the pattern for agreement. "Whatever you need. But please, explain how this will work. Your methods are unfamiliar to us." Anne gestured, and a new hologram appeared. A detailed model of a human-designed medical nanite. "Think of these as microscopic surgeons," she explained. "But instead of cutting with knives, they work at the molecular level. We program them to recognize the crystal structure and break it down while preserving the healthy tissue." "Barbaric," Dr. Blue muttered, but there was a note of fascination in his translated voice. "The real innovation," Anne continued, ignoring the comment, "is how we combine this with biological repair. Mark, would you show them?" Mark, who had accompanied them from Centauri Prime, stepped forward and activated another display. This one showed human stem cells, glowing with subtle modifications. "We've engineered these cells to work in conjunction with the nanites. As the crystals are broken down, the stem cells move in to repair the damage. It's the combination that makes it effective," Anne explained. "Technology and biology working together, each making up for the other's limitations." The alien doctors exchanged looks. This approach went against everything they had been taught about proper medical treatment, but they couldn't deny the logic behind it. "How soon can you begin?" Robert asked, his translator barely able to keep up with his rapid speech patterns. Anne's face grew serious. "We need 24 hours to program the nanites and prepare the stem cells. But first, Speaker," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "you should understand that this has never been attempted on your species before. The risks are significant." Robert moved to his son's containment unit, placing one tentacle gently against the transparent barrier. "Look at him. The crystals grow larger every hour. We have no choice but to try." Anne nodded and began issuing orders to her team. Medical drones zipped off to begin preparations, and human technicians started calibrating equipment. The alien doctors watched with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity as the unfamiliar human technology hummed to life around them. In his containment unit, Tom slept on, unaware that he was about to become the focus of the most ambitious human medical procedure ever attempted on an alien patient. The fate of future human-alien medical cooperation would depend on what happened in the next 24 hours. The gleaming halls of Earth's Advanced Medical Center in Geneva stood in stark contrast to the crystalline architecture of Centauri Prime. Instead of towering spires and organic curves, the human facility was all clean lines and practical efficiency. Medical drones hummed quietly through the corridors, carrying supplies and monitoring equipment. Tom lay in a specialized containment unit, his bluish skin now showing even more pronounced crystal formations. First Speaker Robert hadn't left his son's side during the entire transport from Centauri Prime. His tentacles moved restlessly, betraying his anxiety despite his diplomatic training. Dr. Ann, the facility's chief of experimental procedures, studied the real-time scans of Tom's neural pathways with intense concentration. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her eyes reflected the holographic displays floating around the containment unit. "The crystallization pattern is fascinating," she murmured, more to herself than the others present. "It's following the myelin sheaths of the neural pathways, but the progression isn't uniform." She turned to Dr. Blue, who stood uncomfortably in the human facility. "Have you ever seen anything like this alignment before?" Dr. Blue's skin shifted through various shades of uncertainty. "Never. This variant appears to be unique. That's partly why our treatments failed. We couldn't predict its behavior." Anne nodded, her fingers dancing through the holographic controls. "Watch this," she said, pulling up a comparison display. On one side was Tom's scan. On the other was a human neural pathway, affected by early teleportation accidents. "See the similarity in the crystal structure?" The alien doctors gathered closer, their various sensory organs focused on the display. Dr. Green's bioluminescent spots pulsed with surprise. "The lattice formation. It's almost identical." "Almost," Anne agreed, "but not quite. That's why we can't just use our existing treatment protocol. We need to modify it for Tom's unique biology." She turned to face Robert. "With your permission, we'd like to take a genetic sample to begin customizing the nanites." Robert's tentacles formed the pattern for agreement. "Whatever you need. But please, explain how this will work. Your methods are unfamiliar to us." Anne gestured, and a new hologram appeared, a detailed model of a human-designed medical nanite. "Think of these as microscopic surgeons," she explained. "But instead of cutting with knives, they work at the molecular level. We program them to recognize the crystal structure and break it down while preserving the healthy tissue." "Barbaric," Dr. Blue muttered, but there was a note of fascination in his translated voice. "The real innovation," Anne continued, ignoring the comment, "is how we combine this with biological repair. Mark, would you show them?" Mark, who had accompanied them from Centauri Prime, stepped forward and activated another display. This one showed human stem cells, glowing with subtle modifications. "We've engineered these cells to work in conjunction with the nanites. As the crystals are broken down, the stem cells move in to repair the damage. It's the combination that makes it effective," Anne explained. "Technology and biology working together, each making up for the other's limitations." The alien doctors exchanged looks. This approach went against everything they had been taught about proper medical treatment, but they couldn't deny the logic behind it. "How soon can you begin?" Robert asked, his translator barely able to keep up with his rapid speech patterns. Anne's face grew serious. "We need 24 hours to program the nanites and prepare the stem cells. But first, Speaker," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "you should understand that this has never been attempted on your species before. The risks are significant." Robert moved to his son's containment unit, placing one tentacle gently against the transparent barrier. "Look at him. The crystals grow larger every hour. We have no choice but to try." Anne nodded and began issuing orders to her team. Medical drones zipped off to begin preparations, and human technicians started calibrating equipment. The alien doctors watched with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity as the unfamiliar human technology hummed to life around them. In his containment unit, Tom slept on, unaware that he was about to become the focus of the most ambitious human medical procedure ever attempted on an alien patient. The fate of future human-alien medical cooperation would depend on what happened in the next 24 hours. The operating theater hummed with the combined energy of human and alien medical technology. Tom lay motionless in the center, surrounded by a complex array of equipment. Holographic displays showed his vital signs, while force fields maintained a sterile environment around him. "Begin nanite introduction sequence," Anne commanded, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. She stood at the primary control station, her fingers hovering over the emergency shutdown controls. "Mark, monitor the crystal response patterns." Mark nodded, his eyes fixed on the real-time neural scans. First wave of nanites entering now. Crystal interaction in 3, 2, 1. The room fell silent as they watched the microscopic machines make first contact with the crystalline formations in Tom's brain. Dr. Blue's skin shifted through various shades of anxiety as he monitored the alien patient's life signs. "Initial crystal modification successful," Mark reported. "Pathway formation beginning." "Wait." He leaned closer to his display. "Something's wrong. The crystal reformation rate is accelerating beyond predicted levels." Anne's hands flew across her controls, compensating, adjusting nanite behavioral protocols. She turned to Dr. Blue. "How are his vital signs?" "Unstable but holding," the alien doctor responded. His 4 hands worked multiple interfaces simultaneously. "Neural pressure is increasing. We need to slow this down." Robert watched from behind a containment field, his tentacles twisted into knots of worry. The translator picked up his whispered words. "Stay strong, my son." Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the operating theater. The crystal formations were expanding faster than the nanites could modify them, creating dangerous pressure on Tom's neural tissues. "We're losing control," Mark shouted. "The crystals are adapting to the nanite programming." Anne made a split-second decision. "Initiating emergency protocol Delta. Release the reserve stem cells now." "What?" Dr. Blue's skin paled. "That wasn't part of the simulation. The tissue saturation levels. We'll kill him if we don't try," Anne cut him off. "Mark, do it." Mark slammed his hand down on the activation sequence. A new wave of modified stem cells flooded into Tom's neural pathways. For a terrifying moment, all the vital sign readings spiked into critical levels. Then something unexpected happened. "Look at this," Dr. Green called from her monitoring station, her bioluminescent spots pulsing rapidly. "The stem cells. They're not just following the crystal pathways. They're creating new ones." The holographic display showed an incredible sight. The combination of nanites and stem cells had created a unique reaction. Instead of fighting against the crystal formations, the stem cells were using them as scaffolding to build new neural connections. "His body's accepting it," Anne breathed. "The crystals aren't dissolving. They're being incorporated into his neural network." Dr. Blue's skin rippled with amazement. "Impossible. This goes against everything we know about crystal neural infections." "Sometimes," Mark said quietly, "impossible just means we haven't tried the right approach yet." For the next 2 hours, the medical team worked tirelessly, adjusting parameters and monitoring every minute change in Tom's condition. The nanites continued their work, guided by the AI systems, while the stem cells rebuilt and reinforced his neural pathways. Finally, the last reading stabilized. Anne stepped back from her station, exhaustion evident on her face. "Treatment phase complete. Patient is stable." Robert's tentacles trembled as he asked, "Did it work? Will he recover?" Anne looked at the final scans, then at her alien colleagues. "The crystals have been fully integrated into his neural network. They're not just stable. They're actually enhancing his neural processes. He's going to be fine." The tension in the room broke. Human and alien medical staff celebrated together, professional barriers forgotten in the joy of success. Dr. Blue's skin showed patterns that hadn't been seen in the entire time he'd been on Earth. patterns of profound respect. In the recovery unit, Tom's vital signs continued to strengthen. The impossible had become possible, and in doing so, had opened up an entirely new field of human-alien medical cooperation. The first battle had been won, but the real revolution in galactic medicine was just beginning. 2 weeks after the groundbreaking procedure, Tom sat up in his recovery bed, watching in fascination as small crystalline patterns shimmered beneath his skin. The patterns no longer represented death. Instead, they had become a part of him, strengthening his neural network in ways no one had thought possible. "The scans are remarkable," Anne said, showing the latest results to the assembled team of human and alien doctors. "The crystal structures have fully integrated with his nervous system. His neural processing speed has increased by almost 40%. First speaker Robert stood beside his son's bed, his tentacles moving in patterns of joy that needed no translation. "He's already speaking clearer than before the illness. Yesterday, he solved a quantum mathematics puzzle that would have challenged our best adults." Dr. Blue moved closer to examine the holographic brain scans floating above Tom's bed. His skin rippled with scientific curiosity. "The crystal matrices, they're acting like natural quantum processors. This is unprecedented in medical history." Tom looked up at the doctors surrounding him. "It feels different," he said, his translator conveying a child's wonder. "Like I can think in new ways, see things I couldn't see before." Mark, who had been monitoring Tom's recovery since the procedure, pulled up another set of scans. "Look at this pattern of neural activity. The crystals aren't just conducting signals, they're amplifying them, creating new pathways we never anticipated." Dr. Green's bioluminescent spots pulsed with excitement as she studied the data. "This could revolutionize our understanding of neural enhancement. The possibilities for treating other conditions are enormous," Anne finished. She turned to Robert. "With your permission, we'd like to document this case for the Galactic Medical Archives. This could help countless others." Robert's tentacles formed a pattern of emphatic agreement. "Of course, my son's recovery should benefit as many as possible." He paused, his translator struggling to convey the depth of his emotion. "You did more than save his life. You've opened doors we never knew existed." Tom suddenly sat up straighter, his eyes bright with interest. "Dr. Anne, can I show them the thing we discovered yesterday?" Anne smiled and nodded. She handed Tom a complex puzzle cube, a teaching tool used in advanced xenobiology classes. The assembled doctors watched in amazement as Tom's hands moved over the cube, solving patterns that usually took hours to decode in mere minutes. "The crystal networks," Dr. Blue observed, his skin showing patterns of astonishment. "They're allowing him to process multiple solutions simultaneously, like a living quantum computer. But completely stable," Mark added. "The integration is perfect." His bodies accepted the crystals as if they were always meant to be there. A soft chime interrupted their discussion. A medical drone arrived, carrying the latest batch of test results. Anne reviewed them quickly, her face breaking into a broad smile. "All markers are positive," she announced. "Tom, you're officially cleared to return home. Though we'll want you to come back for regular checkups, of course." Tom beamed, looking up at his father. Robert's tentacles moved in a gesture of pure happiness that needed no translation. Dr. Blue moved to stand beside Anne. His skin showed a complex pattern that the other alien doctors recognized as a formal apology. "We were wrong," he said simply, "about human medicine, about combining technology with biological processes. This success proves that sometimes the best solutions come from unexpected places." "Not unexpected," Anne corrected gently, "just different. We all have something to teach each other." As the medical team began preparing for Tom's discharge, Mark caught sight of the boy examining his own hands, watching the crystal patterns shift beneath his skin. There was no fear in his expression, only curiosity and wonder. This was more than just a medical breakthrough. It was proof that the combination of human ingenuity and alien biology could achieve things neither civilization had dreamed possible. The crystal formations that had once threatened Tom's life had become a bridge between two very different approaches to medicine. And somewhere in the vast galaxy, other patients waited, their own impossible conditions perhaps just one unexpected solution away from being cured. 6 months after Tom's miraculous recovery, the Grand Medical Chamber of the Galactic Alliance was packed with representatives from over 100 species. The massive amphitheater, usually reserved for the most prestigious medical conferences, hummed with excited discussion in countless languages. Anne stood at the central podium, surrounded by holographic displays showing the results of Tom's treatment and subsequent progress. Beside her, Tom himself stood tall and confident, the crystal patterns beneath his skin now forming elegant, shifting designs that drew admiring looks from the assembled delegates. What we achieved was more than just a cure, Anne explained to the gathered audience. It was proof that we must look beyond our traditional approaches to medicine. The combination of human nanite technology and biological solutions has opened up possibilities we're only beginning to understand. Dr. Blue, now the head of the newly formed Human-Alien Medical Cooperation Initiative, stepped forward. His skin displayed patterns of pride as he gestured to a series of new case studies floating above the audience. In the past 6 months, he announced, we've successfully adapted this treatment protocol for 17 different species. Conditions we once thought untreatable have yielded to this combined approach. The holographic displays shifted to show more patients, beams of various species who had benefited from the new treatment methods. Each case represented a life saved or transformed by the merger of human and alien medical science. First speaker Robert, who had become a passionate advocate for human medical practices, addressed the chamber next. My son's case was just the beginning. Today, I am proud to announce the establishment of the first Joint Species Medical Research Center, a place where doctors from all worlds can work together, combining their knowledge and approaches. The announcement was met with thunderous approval. Even species that had traditionally been skeptical of human medical practices were now eager to participate. Mark, watching from his seat near the front, couldn't help but smile as he remembered the initial resistance to using human technology. Now those same critics were lining up to learn about Earth's medical innovations. Tom stepped up to the podium, his presence commanding attention despite his youth. The crystal patterns beneath his skin pulsed gently as he spoke. I was supposed to die, he said simply, his translator conveying his words to every being present. Instead, I was given a gift. These crystals that should have killed me now help me think in ways I never could before. That's what happens when we stop insisting that our way is the only way. The chamber erupted in approving gestures and vocalizations. Dr. Green's spots flashed in a pattern that indicated deep agreement as she presented the next phase of their research. We're already seeing applications beyond medicine, she explained. The crystal nanite integration process has implications for everything from space travel to communications technology. This is truly the beginning of a new era. Anne concluded the presentation by activating a final hologram, a map of the galaxy with bright points, showing all the medical facilities that had already adopted the new combined treatment protocols. The barriers between human and alien medicine are falling, she said. Together, we're finding solutions that neither of us could have discovered alone. This is the future of healing, not just bodies, but bridging the gaps between our species. As the chamber filled with approving sounds and gestures, Tom demonstrated some of his enhanced abilities, solving complex problems that amazed even the most advanced scientific minds present. He had become living proof that what some called impossible was often just the beginning of a new possibility. Later, as the delegates began to disperse, Dr. Blue approached Anne with all 4 hands extended in a gesture of deepest respect. You humans have a saying, he said, his translator working to convey the emotion in his voice, about how the darkest night leads to the brightest dawn. Anne nodded, understanding what he meant. From the near tragedy of Tom's illness had come a revolution in medical science that would benefit countless lives across the galaxy. The impossible had not only been healed, It had become a gateway to a future where the combined knowledge of all species would push the boundaries of what was possible in medicine and beyond. And somewhere in the vast expanse of space, another impossible case waited to be transformed into another miracle of human-alien cooperation.